What would you do if you came home early, expecting to surprise your family, only to discover your wife had been living a double life with someone you trusted? This is the story of how I lost everything, only to find something greater than I ever imagined. From a young age, I found a sense of peace on those endless stretches of open highway. As a teenager, I spent hours at my uncle's repair shop, getting my hands dirty and learning how engines worked. There was something deeply satisfying about fixing things that were broken. After finishing high school, I felt drawn to the freedom and solitude that trucking promised, so I earned my commercial driver's license. For years, I drove coast to coast, meeting all sorts of people, folks from small towns and strangers in bustling cities. One summer, while delivering a load of hay bales to a remote farm in Nebraska, I came across a family struggling with a broken well. Without thinking twice, I jumped in to help, spending hours rigging up a temporary fix until they could get a professional out there. That moment stuck with me. It was a reminder of how even the smallest acts of kindness could make a lasting impact on someone's life. Meeting Marcy was like a whirlwind I never saw coming. We crossed paths at a diner during one of my layovers, and her quick wit and infectious laugh instantly drew me in. Within half a year, we were standing at the altar, vowing to build a future based on trust and shared dreams. But over time, little cracks started to appear in our marriage, small, subtle ones at first, but they were hard to ignore. I remember one grueling trip where I stopped to help another trucker whose rig had flipped in the middle of a storm. As we waited for help to arrive, we sat in the rain sharing soggy sandwiches. He opened up to me about his struggling marriage, and his words lingered with me for weeks. They made me start wondering whether my own relationship with Marcy was as solid as I wanted to believe. No matter how tough life on the road got, my daughters, Linda and Lauren, kept me grounded. Even when I was gone for days, sometimes weeks, their nightly phone calls gave me a sense of purpose. I used to dream of one day being able to spend more time at home with them, but the reality of supporting a growing family meant I had to keep driving. Then, during one trip through Texas, fate took an unexpected turn. While delivering medical supplies, I found myself in a small farming community that was on the brink of losing their land. What started as a single phone call to see if I could help ended up becoming a full-fledged partnership. That decision to get involved set off a chain of events, ones that would bring moments of both great success and deep sorrow into my life. About 5 years ago, my life took an unexpected turn that set me on a completely different path. What started as a routine delivery ended up becoming the foundation for something far greater, a thriving settlement called Circumstances, now home to 349 people. It's a community that grew out of a chance encounter and a quick decision. It all began one afternoon after I finished delivering a load of specialty bandages in Texas. My next assignment promised an early return home, something that rarely happened. Thanks to my certification for handling sensitive materials, I was one of the few drivers eligible for the job. The pickup point was nearby, and the destination was just about an hour from home. I decided to take a different route to shave off some travel time, which put me ahead of schedule by several hours, time I never expected to use in the way I ultimately did. On my way back, I stopped at an intersection where a hand-painted sign caught my eye. It advertised land for sale, and a closer look revealed that the property was on the verge of being seized due to unpaid taxes. Curious, I followed the signs to a small farmhouse and met an elderly couple who were struggling to keep their farm afloat. They were hoping to sell part of their land to cover rising property taxes. The situation tugged at something deep inside me, so I decided to call my dad. Together, we agreed to buy the farm through our family trust at a fair market price, which gave the couple a lifeline. They were able to stay in their home as long-term renters, paying an affordable rent that eased their burden. In return, they offered to help us out with whatever we needed. After securing the deal, we decided to carve out a 10-acre plot at the crossroads to build a gas station and convenience store. It seemed like a smart move since the nearest town was over an hour away. I also suggested that my dad look into acquiring additional parcels of land around the intersection. With some effort, he managed to buy 10 acres on each corner, further expanding our investment. While surveying the property, we stumbled upon something incredible, an underground river running beneath the land. The water source was abundant enough to supply tens of thousands of people, making the location perfect for future development. It felt like everything was falling into place, as if this opportunity had been waiting for us all along. After wrapping up my delivery, I accepted another rush job, but thankfully, I still managed to make it home on time. About 6 months later, I found myself on the road again, tackling a grueling 16-day haul that tested my patience and endurance. During that trip, my truck broke down, forcing me to stop at a repair shop. By the time the work was done, they had restored the truck so well that it looked as good as new, clean enough to qualify for collector plates. That evening, I finally arrived home in time for dinner, eager to unwind and enjoy a quiet night with my wife, Marcy, and our 2 daughters. After spending over 2 weeks on the road, it felt great to be back, and I was especially excited to surprise Marcy before her workday started at 9 a.m. As I turned onto our street around 8 a.m., my excitement gave way to confusion. Sitting in our driveway was a truck I didn't recognize, a vehicle that didn't belong there. It wasn't until I spotted the logo on the side of the truck that my heart sank. It belonged to Jack Readings, my boss's son and my co-driver. I tried to brush off the nagging thoughts, convincing myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. But something didn't sit right. My unease only deepened when I noticed a faint glow seeping out from under the door to the unfinished 3rd floor of our house. That space had always been dark and unused, so the light was puzzling. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I climbed the stairs, quietly opened the door, and froze in disbelief. The once empty space had been completely transformed. Sunlight poured in through open curtains, illuminating a beautifully renovated master suite. There was a king-sized bed, walk-in closets, a cozy sitting area with a TV, and even an ensuite bathroom. None of these renovations had ever been mentioned to me, not a word. As I took in the scene, I spotted several items that didn't belong to me: oversized shirts, stacks of DVDs, and a framed photo of Jack with his parents. My stomach churned as I held up one of Jack's shirts, knowing full well it wasn't mine. Desperate for clarity, I found a DVD in the room, rewound it, and pressed play. What I saw on that screen confirmed my worst fears. The footage showed Marcy and Jack together, intimately involved, with Jack clearly visible. I sat there in silence, stunned by what I had just uncovered. There was no going back from this. The evidence was undeniable. Once I collected myself, I grabbed my suitcase from the basement and started packing my clothes, numb to everything except the raw sense of betrayal. I couldn't stay here anymore. I needed to get out, to put some distance between myself and the life I thought I had. Before leaving, I sent Jack a message, letting him know I was home. Then, the next morning, I walked into my boss, Jace Reading's office and quit on the spot. Naturally, Jace wanted to know why I was resigning so abruptly. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and showed him footage of the newly renovated 3rd floor of my house, complete with the framed photo of his family. His expression darkened as he realized what he was looking at. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice tense. "It's from my own house," I said quietly, my tone steady but filled with emotion. I responded flatly, my voice devoid of emotion, that part of the house wasn't supposed to be remodeled, especially not for affairs with married women. "But this is beyond anything I ever imagined." Jace didn't hesitate. True to his word, he fired Jack on the spot and informed me later that he had also cut Jack out of the family inheritance, citing his disgraceful actions and the harm he had caused. It didn't undo what had happened, but it was some measure of justice. Later, after cashing my paycheck, emptying our joint accounts, and settling my bill at the auto shop, I headed over to my daughter's school. I arranged a meeting with them in the presence of their guidance counselor to ensure everything was handled appropriately, with no room for misinterpretation of my intentions. It was important to me that this situation didn't cause unnecessary confusion or distress for my girls. Once I returned home, I gathered a few key items from the trash I had boxed up earlier at the house. I placed the box on the bed in the newly renovated master suite, along with a card my daughters had signed for Uncle Jack and a shredded piece of Marcy's baby doll lingerie. I had cut it apart using her sewing scissors as a final statement. After leaving that symbolic message, I loaded my tools into my truck and secured them with a tarp, ready to move forward with my life. While I was loading up, my neighbor John came over. He gave me a knowing look and said casually, "I guess you finally found out about Marcy's second husband." "Second husband?" I asked, confused and caught off guard by his choice of words. "Yeah," he replied, shrugging as if this was common knowledge. "Jack's been around for a while. People in the neighborhood have seen him coming and going. I figured you knew." His comment left me stunned. The phrase, second husband, played over and over in my mind. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. What kind of joke had my life turned into? Marcy had carried on this affair so openly that even the neighbors had noticed. Maybe this was her strange way of signaling that things with Jack were coming to an end, but it was clear she hadn't pieced together that I was the one behind her newfound nightmare. This was just the start, I had more planned. As I watched from a distance, my two daughters got off the school bus and walked toward the house. A few moments later, a text from Lauren popped up on my phone. "Call us, but don't say anything. We want you to hear what we have to tell Mom. She needs to hear the truth, just like you've always taught us." Their message caught me off guard, but it also gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, my daughters understood more than I thought. After all, I had always tried to teach them the importance of honesty and standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Later, when we were all in the house, my neighbor's earlier comment was still on my mind. I waited patiently as Lauren and her sister began speaking to Marcy. Lauren's words cut right to the heart of things. "Dad didn't know you remodeled the third floor while he was on the road. You told us it was supposed to be a surprise for him," she said, her voice steady. "But now we know that wasn't true. We kept your secret, like you asked us to, and wow, was it ever a surprise for Dad." Marcy's expression changed instantly. I watched as fear crept into her eyes. She was starting to piece it together. She finally realized who had left the box and messages in the bedroom. There was no hiding now. She knew the truth was out, and that I wasn't the only one who had seen through her lies. Linda's voice cut through the tense silence, laced with bitterness. "He told us you weren't honest. He said you and Dad are getting a divorce because Jack isn't some distant cousin. You've been hiding him as your lover for years." Her tone grew sharper as she went on. "Dad said you've been using him to support Jack's lifestyle, and yours. Not for our family's good, but for your own. He said it makes him feel like his whole life with you has been a lie." Marcy's expression faltered. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Miss Connor, the guidance counselor, shifted uncomfortably, as if unsure how to mediate such a personal confrontation. Meanwhile, Marcy muttered something under her breath, likely trying to make sense of the situation. Maybe she was grasping at the idea that Jack was just a side fling while Dad was her real partner. But even she seemed to realize that from everyone else's perspective, it looked like she'd been leading a double life. The silence that followed was broken by Lauren, her voice steady and calm. "Linda and I talked, and we've decided that you must not only hate Dad, you probably hate us too. That's the only explanation for why you did this for so long." Linda jumped in, her words cutting deeper. "Miss Connor told us that when we turn 13, we can decide who we want to live with. And we've already made up our minds, it's going to be Dad." Lauren continued without missing a beat. "We're going downstairs to call Grandma. She and Grandpa will come get us, and we'll stay with them until Dad gets things sorted out. That way, you and Jack can have the whole house to yourselves." Turning to her sister, she added, "Come on, Linda. Let's go pack and make the call. Before leaving the room, Linda glanced back at Marcy one last time, her expression cold and resolute. Marcy didn't say a word. She seemed to know there was no way to salvage the situation. She could see the storm that lay ahead, lawsuits, public exposure, and the fallout of her affair with Jack. It would destroy both of them. 15 minutes later, the tension spilled into the front yard. Right on cue, Marcy's parents arrived. John, our neighbor, quietly cracked open his front door, curious about the commotion. The raised voices carried clearly across the street, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear the confrontation unfolding. Marcy's mother was livid, her anger unmistakable as she marched their daughters toward the car. Her fury filled the air like a thunderstorm ready to break. But it was her father's disappointment that seemed to cut the deepest. He didn't need to shout, his silence, heavy and disapproving, said it all. As they were leaving, John leaned in close and whispered, "When the construction crew was working on your third floor, Marcy told us it was going to be a rental unit. She said you needed extra income and had decided to rent it out." "That's a complete lie," I said firmly. "The house and land were fully paid off. I remodeled the entire place myself, floor by floor, because I had the time and wanted to do it. She's been lying from the very beginning." John shook his head, clearly frustrated. "So, where do you think the money came from to finish that third floor?" "It sure didn't come from me," I replied, my tone hardening. "I haven't seen a single cent of it." At that point, I realized something needed to be clarified, not just for me, but for everyone caught up in this mess. Jack knew Jace's reputation all too well, and the color drained from his face. He must have understood how far Jace would go to uncover the truth. About 30 minutes later, I asked John to check on Marcy. "She's in the living room now, sitting on the couch," he reported. I decided it was time for the final blow. I sent her a 5-minute video clip, footage of her and Jack caught in an explicit act. The clip ended with Jack's face clearly visible. Along with the video, I attached a single line, "Who's lying now?" From where I sat, I could see my truck parked just outside the window. I sipped my coffee slowly, keeping an eye on the house. A few moments later, Marcy's younger sister, Maureen, walked in and spotted me. Her face was somber, and she approached with a quiet, hesitant voice. "I'm so sorry, Heath. No man deserves to go through what you've been through," she said softly. "Mind if I join you?" I gave a brief nod, and she slid into the seat across from me. For a moment, we just sat there in silence as I savored my coffee, letting the weight of everything settle. Finally, she broke the quiet. "Mom and Dad told me everything last night. The girls explained it all after they got to their house. Just so you know, this blindsided all of us. None of us saw it coming." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, showing her the text I had sent to Marcy the night before. Then, I let her read the message I sent out that morning. As Maureen scrolled through the messages, her eyes welled up with tears. She already knew things were bad, but now, it was clear they were far worse than she'd imagined. The video didn't just expose an affair, it hinted at something deeper, something uglier. By the end of the day, everyone would know the truth, and there would be no way for Marcy and Jack to escape the fallout. "I told Jace that once he starts digging, he'll make it public," I said quietly. "He's determined to uncover the truth, no matter what. It's possible both girls are mine, or both could be Jack's. Heck, maybe neither of them are mine." Maureen listened intently, her expression thoughtful. She had always been the calm presence in Marcy's chaotic world, the one who helped her navigate life's challenges. Maureen had a knack for putting things into perspective, turning what seemed like insurmountable problems into manageable ones. She cared deeply for the people she loved, and I had no doubt that included me. Over the years, she'd quietly compared every man she met to me, and in her mind, none had ever measured up. She believed Marcy had married the wrong sister, and now, she was determined to find a way to keep me in her life. When the time was right, she intended to make her feelings known. Breaking the silence, Morin asked softly, "Heath, do you know where you'll be staying?" "I'll be at Bill's place. Linda and Lauren will be with me, and I'll have some support while I figure things out," I replied. She nodded, understanding my reasoning without needing further explanation. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, though the tension of the morning still hung in the air. Both of us knew the days ahead would be filled with uncertainty, but for now, there was a quiet, shared understanding between us. After finishing breakfast, I grabbed the check, but before I could leave, Morin leaned over and kissed me gently on the cheek, just like she used to. "Heath," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth, "don't forget, there are a lot of people who have always loved you, and will be here for you." I smiled, appreciating the gesture more than I could say. After parting ways, I made my way to Bill's farm, the place I'd always thought of as a second home. Bill greeted me with his usual hearty handshake, his eyes lighting up as he admired my newly restored truck. "Now that's a beauty," he said, reminiscing about the days when trucks were built tough, meant to handle speed and rough terrain alike. As I parked the truck, Bill's wife, whom he fondly called the Missus, called us in for lunch. It was a hearty farmer's meal, and she chuckled at how much I ate. Afterward, I helped her clean up, drying dishes while she put away the leftovers. At one point, her eyes lingered on my bare ring finger, but she didn't say anything about it. By the time we finished, she brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and we sat down to relax for a bit. Meanwhile, Morin and my daughters were on their way, making the 75-mile drive. Thankfully, Morin, being a tax specialist, was in her slow season and had the flexibility to take time off. Throughout the drive, Linda and Lauren kept sending me updates every 10 to 15 minutes. The trip seemed to fly by, and soon, I received a final text letting me know they had just pulled into the driveway. Moments later, the door swung open, and Linda and Lauren ran straight into my arms. Their excitement was palpable, and for the first time in days, I felt a wave of relief. Bill and his wife stood nearby, smiling warmly at the reunion. By the time we reached Bill and Betty's farm, I could tell the girls felt right at home. Betty welcomed everyone with her usual warmth, and Linda and Lauren were thrilled by the change of scenery. As we settled in, Betty reassured me, "Don't worry, Heath, we'll keep the girls here until you're on your feet." It was comforting to know I had people I could count on during this difficult time. Later, I got a call from the family court office. They had interviewed the girls, and the outcome was clearer than I expected. "There's no way Marcy will get custody," they told us firmly. "Her current lifestyle disqualifies her completely." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Relief washed over me, but so did an overwhelming wave of emotion. Before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. I tried to tell Betty to leave so I could collect myself, but she wouldn't hear it. Instead, she stayed by my side, offering quiet support without asking for explanations. I was grateful for that. Meanwhile, back at her house, Marcy sat at the kitchen table, overwhelmed by everything that had unraveled over the past couple of days. Thursday might have been quiet, but Friday had been anything but. Now, she was grappling with the realization that I wasn't coming back, I was moving on without her, and she was left to face the wreckage alone. If Marcy had been able to prove that Jack had been contributing financially, maybe with bank statements showing consistent rent payments over the last few years, things might have looked different for her. But there was no evidence of that. The court saw Jack as little more than a kept man, someone who had benefited from Marcy's support without giving anything in return. That was the final blow. Deep down, Marcy knew she had no one to blame but herself. Her relentless pursuit of Jack had led her here, and now she was left to face the undeniable consequences. Saturday was packed with activity at the farm. Bill took Linda and Lauren out to teach them the basics of operating the small motorcycles he kept parked in the yard. Watching them ride, it was clear they were naturals. They picked it up quickly, laughing and cheering each other on as they zoomed around. After about 2 hours, Bill called it a day. "You'll be sore tomorrow if you don't stop now," he said with a grin. "And since you're already sweaty, why not go cool off in the pond?" The girls didn't need to be told twice. They took off toward the pond, their excitement infectious. Meanwhile, Betty and Morin spent the afternoon growing closer, working together in the kitchen while catching up on everything that had happened. Later, I received a call from Clues, our lawyer. He wanted to thank me for getting the legal letter to him so quickly. He had personally taken it to the office, where it was immediately copied and filed for official records. Shortly after, the state issued a legal notice confirming Bill and Betty's temporary custodianship of Linda and Lauren. Knowing my girls were safe and well cared for gave me some peace of mind. As we continued chatting, Clues shared details about Marcy and Jack's long-standing relationship. Hearing him lay everything out opened my eyes to things I hadn't fully grasped before. It made me realize just how deep this deception had run and how long it had been going on. Though it was difficult to process, it also made one thing clear: I was better off moving forward without her. What I didn't know until later was that on Friday morning, Jack Readings had been served with legal papers while he was in Austin, Texas, picking up a shipment of medical equipment. At nearly the same time, Marcy had been served as well, marking the official start of the legal process. That evening, after dinner, something unexpected happened. Linda turned to Betty and asked shyly, "We were wondering, would it be okay if we called you Grandpa and Grandma?" Betty's eyes filled with tears, clearly overwhelmed by the moment. Her voice trembled as she replied, "Of course. We would love that." Later, she confided in me that she had always dreamed of hearing those words but never thought she would. She and Bill had been unable to have children of their own, and though they had fostered many kids over the years, she never imagined she'd be given this kind of bond with Linda and Lauren. After dinner, I pulled Morin aside to update her on the situation. "It's official," I said, showing her the legal notice and the last text I'd received from Marcy, along with my response. The weight of everything hung in the air between us, but Morin's presence remained steady and comforting. As we stood there, she opened up. "Bill and Betty's story gave me a lot to think about," she said quietly. "They couldn't have kids of their own, so they fostered for years. It gave them a sense of purpose, and a bond." Her words lingered in my mind long after our conversation ended. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke over the farm, I found myself reflecting on everything, how much had changed in such a short time, and how I was finally beginning to feel a sense of hope again. Before long, the rest of the household began to stir, signaling the start of another busy day. After breakfast, Linda and Lauren spent another 3 hours riding the motorcycles with Bill's guidance. By midday, they were sweaty and eager to cool off, so we all headed down to the pond. Bill and Betty brought lawn chairs while the girls splashed and played in the water, their laughter echoing across the quiet farm. At one point, Linda climbed onto a float, only for Lauren to dive under the surface and pop up between her legs, flipping her off into the water. Linda emerged, laughing, her hair soaked and her face glowing with pure joy. Watching them play, I couldn't help but smile. It was the first time in a long while that I'd seen them so carefree. As they swam closer, Morin waded out beside me. Our eyes met, and in that instant, something shifted. There was an unspoken connection, a warmth I hadn't recognized before. Without saying a word, we leaned toward each other, and when our lips met, it was electric, filled with a passion and intensity unlike anything I'd ever felt. "Wow," I murmured, pulling back slightly, still caught in the moment. "That was intense." She smiled softly, her voice both confident and tender. "You don't know how long I've waited for this." Later that evening, as we sat outside watching the sunset, Morin broke the silence. "I told Betty about us," she said. "She told me I looked happier than I have in years, so I guess my poker face isn't as good as I thought." "How did she take it?" I asked, curious but cautious. "She's concerned, of course, with everything going on. She asked if anything had happened yet, and I told her no. Morin replied with a slight smile. Then she asked me how long I've been in love with you. I glanced at her, surprised. And what did you say? Her eyes met mine, unwavering. Since the summer before you married Marcy. Her words left me stunned. That long? And it took all of this for me to notice? She nodded, her expression soft but sure. I knew it wasn't the right time back then. But now things feel different. I was expecting a lecture, Morin admitted with a smile. Later that morning, I received a call with surprising news. Jace Readings had obtained a court order for paternity tests to determine whether Lauren and Linda were really my daughters. The news came as a shock, and it hit Clues particularly hard. He had believed Marcy's affair with Jack had only lasted for the past 3 years, but now he was devastated by the possibility that it had gone on much longer. He was so upset that he stormed into the social services office and confronted Marcy right in front of her coworkers. As far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me, he declared, his voice echoing through the building. Meanwhile, I was piecing together another crucial part of the puzzle. You won't believe what I've uncovered, I told Morin. I figured out who was secretly filming Jack and Marcy. Her eyes widened. Who? It was Jason, I explained. And right now, he's with Marcy in the 3rd-floor bedroom. John and I stood across the street, watching as Jace walked over, unlocked the door to my house, and stepped inside. Tension hung thick in the air. What do you think he's going to do when he finds out? John asked. Jace is a proud man, I replied quietly. How he reacts depends on where that pride takes him. I just hope it doesn't push him too far. John nodded. Agreed. The fallout of it all was messy, but one truth became undeniable: Marcy had never truly loved me. Later, I visited Jace in the hospital after things escalated further. His wife embraced me with tears in her eyes. This isn't your fault, I reassured her gently. You're not responsible for your children's choices. Despite everything, Jace managed a weak smile. You've always kept your cool, Heath. I've come close, I admitted, but I'm afraid that if I ever lost it, I wouldn't be able to stop. Jace chuckled lightly. Well, Jason's in jail, Jack's lost his trust fund, and the fallout from this whole mess is still unraveling. Want to manage the fleet again? I declined with a small smile. Thanks, but I'm working on a new chapter in my life. Jace nodded, his expression understanding. Throwing you away was the worst mistake Marcy ever made. If you and Morin work out, you'll have my full support. That conversation marked the beginning of my journey to rebuild my life. 5 years later, I found myself standing on our front porch, watching Linda and Lauren wait for the school bus. Beside me, Morin, now my wife, was busy tending to our 2 preschool-aged sons. Bill and Betty had become devoted grandparents, helping us raise the kids in this growing, vibrant community. Our gas station and convenience store had grown into something more. It was now the heart of the village, complete with a post office. On warm days, I loved walking from our house to the store, enjoying the sense of peace and purpose I had found here. Throwing me away may have been the best thing Marcy ever did for me, because it gave me the chance to build something new, something real.